The world's largest oil producer, Saudi Arabia, is reportedly asking to join BRICS.
Now, BRICS is an acronym for the 5 major emerging global economies, namely Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
International reserve currency planned by Russia and China. Now, the announcement of a reserve currency was made by Russian President Vladimir Putin.
The Saudis are cutting oil production as part of OPEC's decision to reduce.
Senate Democrats urging President Biden to end cooperation with Saudi Arabia.
President Biden vowing to punish Saudi Arabia.
Even old friends of the West are ditching it, like Saudi Arabia, and now it wants to be a part of BRICS.
Hi everybody, Saudi Arabia is one of the most powerful countries in the world, and more importantly, it has always been the closest ally to the United States of America. But now, Saudi Arabia is engaged in a cold war with the very same United States. While Saudi decreased oil production by 2 million barrels to worsen the inflation in the US, Biden threatened Saudi Arabia with unspecified consequences and even proposed to pass the NOPEC bill to challenge the security of Saudi Arabia itself. So in return, the Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman made a big move that sent jitters down the spine of the United States of America. And this was his request to join India, Russia and China at the BRICS alliance. On top of that, Putin announced the emergence of a new world currency called the BRICS currency. And this is very beneficial for India, Russia and China. So in this case study, let's do a deep dive and try to understand what exactly is this BRICS alliance all about? How will Saudi Arabia's entry into this BRICS alliance change the dynamics of world power itself? What is Putin's idea of the BRICS currency? And most importantly, what are the study materials to help you understand this critical geopolitical situation better? This video is brought to you by Coding Invaders, but more on this at the end of the video. Chalo, let's start from the basics and try to understand what exactly is this BRICS alliance and what is so special about it that Iran, Saudi and Argentina, all of them are so keen to join it. Well, BRICS is nothing but the acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. And just like we have the G7 with Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK and the US, for BRICS, we have the 5 largest emerging economies in the world coming together to form an alliance. And most people underestimate BRICS because it has the emerging economies as compared to developed economies in the G7. But you know what guys, if you take a pause and look at BRICS closely, you will see that these 5 countries together consist of 41% of the world's population and their combined GDP is over 24.4 trillion US dollars. On top of that, they also have a substantial military capability and an increasing political influence in the global sphere. And by coming together, this group commands a voice for itself in the global sphere. For example, it helps us voice our concerns of the developing economies every time the West designs policies that are favorable specifically for themselves. And a classic example of the same is the carbon tax.
Carbon must have its price because nature cannot pay this price anymore.
The idea of a carbon border tax is gaining ground in the United States and the European Union.
A carbon border tax to level the playing field for European products if other countries do not go as far as us or refuse to go in the right direction.
Western countries don't want to see companies packing up for places like China or India because of their less stringent environmental rules, which make the goods produced there cheaper.
Now you know guys, the European countries often complain about Indian and Chinese steel industry causing a lot of carbon emissions. So they are now planning to impose a carbon tax because their industries are switching to clean energy. So in 2030, when Indian and Chinese steel enter the international market, our products will be levied a tax specifically because we are emitting more carbon than these developed countries. But this graph exposes their hypocrisy very clearly. If you look at this graph, you'll realize that these developed countries have emitted so much carbon during their developing phase that they themselves are largely responsible for climate change. But even then, they forget the past and now they're imposing carbon tax on us when we desperately need economic fuel to grow. Then, just like the Asian Development Bank, we have the New Development Bank. And this is meant to disburse low interest loans for each country's development. In short, if the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank start bullying you, this New Development Bank will actually help you out as a backup. And last and most obviously, there is economic and military cooperation also. This is the reason and the importance of the BRICS alliance. If this is very clear to you, let's try to understand why does Saudi Arabia want to join the BRICS alliance. This is a story that started as soon as the Russia-Ukraine war started, and like we saw, first the price of oil skyrocketed, then slowly the price of oil started dropping from its peak, and then the oil price dropped to lower than the pre-war numbers. And this is where the Saudi and the OPEC countries were scared that the recession will bring down the price of oil even further, because every time recession happens, the oil price drops to very, very low levels. So in order to increase their revenue, they decided to cut their production by 2 million barrels a day. As a result, the price of oil shot up from $91 a barrel to $94 a barrel. And like we saw, on one side, while this move was extremely beneficial for the OPEC, it created a havoc in the West.
President Biden says there will be consequences for Saudi Arabia after the kingdom sided with other oil-producing countries to significantly cut production.
President Biden threatens consequences for Saudi Arabia after they decided to cut global oil production. This includes Saudi Arabia's OPEC allies.
The American president was spotted fist bumping with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And now, he's promising to punish the kingdom.
And this is what, ladies and gentlemen, violated the petrodollar agreement between the US and Saudi. And this agreement is something that I've explained countless times in the previous videos, and it is nothing but the meeting between Franklin Roosevelt and the Saudi king. And what was this deal? Saudi Arabia would sell oil in dollars and the US would provide security to Saudi. So when Biden threatened of consequences and threatened to pass the bill to stop weapons trade, what is happening? US is violating its side of the petrodollar agreement. So Saudi said, okay guys, if you threaten us with the weakening of our security, we are going to mess with your dollars. And more importantly, if you look at the past 3 years data, you will see that Saudi has already started to make defense deals both with China and Russia, so that they are not over-dependent on the US. Secondly, like we saw in the previous episode, the Biden government wants to lift the economic sanctions on Iran, who is Saudi's enemy in the Middle East. And the third reason has to do with the oil consumption of BRICS. Of these BRICS countries, China, Brazil and India are the biggest consumers of oil in the world. So if they join BRICS, Saudi will have the backing of the biggest oil buyers in the world. These are the reasons why Saudi wants to join the BRICS alliance. And this brings us to the most important question of all, and that is, what will happen as Saudi joins BRICS? Well, the first thing that is going to happen is that the US economy will be on its path to ruins. The US bank interest will spike and it will lead to a disaster. The question is, what does Saudi joining BRICS have to do with the US bank's interest rates? Well, if you remember from our Russia-China episode, it will stop something called petrodollar recycling. For those who don't know, here's a very simple explanation of the same. Since majority of the oil can be bought only in dollars, all the countries keep their dollar reserves with the US banks. And because they are anyways using the dollar to trade oil, they use the surplus dollars for other trade purposes, or they invest it in the US economy. For example, in case of India, although India did only $175 billion worth of trade with US this year, we still have $532.868 billion in our reserves. So with the rest $357 billion, $200 billion may be used to trade with other countries, and the rest $157 billion, India could invest that money into the US economy in the form of US Treasury bonds. And just like that, all the countries in the world have their surplus forex reserves invested in the US economy. This money in total amounts to $7.5 trillion US. And this money is used by the US banks to lend to American businesses at very low interest rates. As a result, debt is very cheap in the US. So eventually, American businesses prosper and their economy keeps on growing. So basically, Saudi selling oil gives the US a $7 trillion advantage. Therefore, if Saudi Arabia joins BRICS, they could sign something called the Bilateral Currency Swap Agreement, by which the BRICS countries do not have to buy oil in dollars. So if you know how the Bilateral Currency Swap Agreement works, please skip to this timestamp. If you don't, here's a very simple explanation of the same. Let's say China and UK sign a Bilateral Currency Swap Agreement of 5 years for a value of $1 million. What this means is that China will sell $1 million worth of yuan to UK, and UK will sell $1 million worth of pounds to China. So after conversion, China will give 6.842 million yuan to UK, and UK will give China 847,250 pounds. And they will agree upon the exchange rate to be 8.07. So for 5 years, Chinese central bank can sell these pounds and get US dollars, or it can lend these pounds to domestic banks and companies to settle their trade. Similarly, the Bank of England can do the same with yuan. So now, if an English businessman wants to buy 1 million yuan worth of goods from China, if he went by the conventional means, he would have to pay pounds to the English bank, which will then convert the sum to dollars, and then it would transfer the dollars to the US bank account of China, and then the Chinese bank will transfer the converted sum of yuan to the Chinese businessman. But now, the English businessman would simply borrow 1 million yuan from the Bank of England and directly pay the Chinese bank account in England. And as soon as this money is transferred in the Chinese bank account in England, the Chinese bank in China would transfer 1 million yuan to the Chinese businessman. And the same thing could be done vice versa when a Chinese businessman wants to sell something in the UK. So if you see, two big players can now do international trade without depending on the US dollar. This is how bilateral currency swap works. And after 5 years, both central banks of UK and China will pay their respective currencies back at the agreed exchange rate of 8.07. So this way, both the countries get three major advantages. Number one, both countries can eliminate their exchange risk. Number two, both countries can use this currency to exchange it for dollars if needed. And number three, businesses in both countries can carry out trade more economically. So eventually, the business relationship between both these countries gets better and better. And last and most obviously, the dependency on the US dollar decreases by a large extent. On top of that, China has already mastered the prototype of an alternate international payment network called the M-Bridge prototype. This is nothing but an alternative to SWIFT to make international transactions with central bank digital currency. Yes, this is a revolutionary project that is being done in collaboration with the BIS Innovation Hub at the Hong Kong Center, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the Bank of Thailand, the Digital Currency Institute of People's Bank of China, and the Central Bank of United Arab Emirates. And 20 banks in Hong Kong, Thailand, mainland China, and the UAE used this M-Bridge platform to conduct 164 payments and foreign exchange transactions totaling over $22 million. So if this prototype becomes successful, it is yet another challenge for SWIFT. This is the reason why even America is desperate to launch the digital dollar.
And now the U.S. is looking into creating its own digital dollar.
A central bank digital currency.
Is the Fed working on a digital dollar?
I think it's possible, is all I would say. You've seen many other countries like ours, well-off countries like ours, that are looking at it seriously.
The day after an implosion in the crypto markets, the Federal Reserve launched a plan to test a digital dollar.
So if Saudi joins BRICS and signs these agreements and starts using the tech to trade with India and China, then two of the biggest consumers of oil will no longer be using dollars to trade. And this is a huge setback for the US because China alone holds $1 trillion worth of US bonds. So if they're not buying oil in dollars, the Chinese could sell those bonds and that could put a dent in the American economy. So even if only China pulls out its treasury bonds, the US will have $1 trillion less in bonds. And this brings us to the most important question of all, and that is, how will Saudi's entry into the BRICS change the world order? Well, this is where we have something called the BRICS currency come in. And according to Putin's announcement, this new currency would act like a basket containing the value of 5 BRICS countries, which are the Chinese renminbi, the Russian ruble, the Indian rupee, the Brazilian real, and the South African rand. This basket would make it semi-decentralized and more stable than the US dollar. And to top it all off, to give the currency even more power and stability, according to experts, this currency could be gold-backed. In simple words, the value of a gold-backed currency is pegged to gold. So tomorrow if Indian rupee becomes gold-backed, then the value of rupee will be defined such that 1 gram of gold equals 50,000 rupees. What it means is that tomorrow if you give 50,000 rupees to RBI, they would redeem its value by giving you 1 gram of gold. But with fiat currency, it's not backed by any commodity. So if I pay you 100 rupees, it simply means I promise to pay 100 rupees and the currency is backed by the faith of the government. And here's how it makes a big difference. So in case of gold-backed currency, if the government has 1 kg of gold and 1 gram of gold is worth 50,000 rupees, then the government can only print 50,000 into 1,000, which is 50 million rupees of currency bills. And if they want to print more, they will first have to buy more gold, keep it in the reserve, and then print money. But with fiat currency, they can simply go on to print money. And this could cause inflation in the economy. So as a trader, I can be more confident about the value of my trade. This is being stated as the reason why the BRICS nation have been buying gold at insane levels. Now, how this BRICS currency is going to emerge and function as an international currency, only Putin can tell. But on the outset, what we need to know is that if the BRICS succeed in designing their own currency, for the first time in half a century, we could again have a currency backed by gold, which on its own would almost instantly make it the most valuable money on earth. And more importantly, if Saudi Arabia joins BRICS, it will not just be gold but even oil that will lay the foundations for the BRICS currency. So two of the most valuable commodities on the planet will back both this alliance and this currency if things go well. This is the reason why the entire world is eagerly watching what Saudi Arabia does and how will it change the world order with BRICS. And this brings me to the last part of the episode, and that are the study materials to help you understand these geopolitical tensions better. But before we move on, I want to quickly thank our partners of this episode, and that is Coding Invaders. People, the international markets have been free falling in the last few weeks, and in conditions like these, there is a high possibility of a job crisis. In fact, there is already a job crisis in the US. But that's where Coding Invaders come in. They help you switch from non-IT profession to IT for high-paying jobs within just 6 to 8 months as a data analyst. Their current placement stats are 93%, and the best part is that before you enroll for the course, they provide you with a guaranteed job agreement with a money-back guarantee. So basically, if you do not get placed, you will get a 100% refund. Their courses have real business case studies, job-oriented projects and assignments designed by industry experts from Amazon, Philips, Deloitte and others. And even a civil engineer like me with a non-IT background will be able to learn data science and be eligible for a high-paying IT job such as a data analyst. So you do not need a coding background to get into such jobs. They have helped 20,000 plus candidates secure 10 to 25 LPA packages in the past 6.5 months with the help of their 300 plus hiring partners. So this Black Friday, you can choose to invest in yourself rather than the markets. So if this sounds useful to you, use the link in the description, enter the code TS35 and get a 35% discount on the job guarantee badge. Moving on to the study materials, the first thing I'm attaching is the document on Enbridge from the BIS Innovation Hub itself. Secondly, I'm attaching a few docs related to BRICS to help you understand the alliance better. And thirdly, I'm attaching Saudi Arabia and all the oil related reports to help you understand these oil wars and conflicts better. So do have a look at them and let me know what you think. That's all from my side for today, guys. If you learned something valuable, please make sure to hit the like button in order to make YouTube Baba happy. And for more such insightful business and political case studies, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.